friends I do have who are trans do not fit, by and large, into these radical categories. In fact, they resist a lot of what they see happening out there. And I thought, well, this is just some weird thing. I'm a pastor, and the kinds of people that I'm going to know are going to be maybe fringe to their own movement. Maybe that's why I was experiencing this. But in your story, you shared about a friend who, like you said, is more of a trans moderate. So maybe share a little bit about that friend and what it is you want, and maybe that friend wants for the trans movement.
Well, that's Giselle Donnelly. And she is one of the world's great defense analysts, actually. She's a trans woman. And I wanted to be really careful when I wrote about this to introduce a trans voice, not my voice. To emphasize this isn't about my opinion and my recommendation to trans people. I don't really see why they should care a fig about what I have to say, but they should care about the many trans Americans who are not on board with the radical genderqueer agenda and who are feeling not only ill-served by it, but kind of being taken for a ride, used as a kind of social battering ram for an agenda they don't agree with.
What would you say that
it was
agenda
important
is?
that that voice be heard. I'm sorry?
What would you say that agenda is?
Well, my article, I tried to distinguish it with 4 propositions.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to walk through all of that now.
I've got them right here. I'll read them, and then you can tell me maybe what we're thinking with them. So you said, number one, these are the claims of what you called radical gender ideology that you're, I think, disputing, if I've understood your article correctly. You said, number one, trans women are women and trans men are men. No difference, full stop. Number two, second claim, human gender and sex are social constructs and are not a binary, but on a continuum. So concepts like male and female are relative and subjective. Number three, gender and sex are chosen identities, and an individual's declared choice can never be doubted or challenged. Lastly, number four, denying or disputing any of the above is violence.
Yeah, so gender ideology is complicated and messy, and actually people who've studied it say it's quite incoherent. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit hard to nail down, but that was my effort to say, here are 4 things that are characteristic of this ideology, which are not characteristic of how mainstream trans people think about themselves. To take the first one, trans women are women and trans men are men. No difference, full stop. Trans people like Giselle will say, that's not true. She says, I am a biological man, but a trans woman. And her view is that she earned that distinction. I mean, she actually had to put in the work to become a trans woman. So she wants that designation trans. And also she wants the kind of medical care and science that'll cater to people like her who are male-bodied biologically. So she has no interest in obliterating the distinction between a trans man and a male, biological male, or a trans woman and a biological female. If you take the second, human gender and sex are social constructions and not a binary, but on a continuum, a sliding scale. That may be a defensible position with gender, with social norms around behaviors of male and female. But it's not true at all with regard to biological sex. We're a sexually dimorphic species. There are a few very small, very rare exceptions to that, but they actually prove the rule. So it's just scientifically wrong to say that sex is on a spectrum and there are all kinds of things, because they're not. The third, gender and sex are chosen identities. So here the notion, again, it's gender and sex. I think to some extent we do choose our gender behaviors, how we present, but we don't choose our sex. We're born with that. Transgender people I know are completely willing to say that. They have no problem with that. In fact, the meaning of transgender is that you're trying to move away from that and toward the other gender, but that stops making sense if you don't have these 2 fundamental categories. Yeah. But the notion here is that simple self-declaration, just the act of saying, I am a man, I am a woman, I am, as one person said a young person, a demigirl, that I can just announce the sex that I want to be. Um, that's also empirically false. And then the last is to me the most troubling. I'm a pluralist. I believe in toleration. Um, I believe in robust disagreement, especially on morally difficult issues. But genderqueer ideology tends to say if you disagree with me on any of these things, if you even question these things, then you're a transphobe, you're committing an act of violence. And on that basis, unfortunately, we're seeing some bullying, some harassment, some campaigns to suppress and censor alternative points of view. We tried not to do that in the gay rights movement in the 90s. We tried to understand that they're going to be difficult issues and that we had to win people over. We couldn't just shut them down.
So going back to the gay movement for a second, that's obviously something that you experienced and that you are, I'm sure in many ways much more familiar with. If you were to maybe imagine a different reality where the gay rights movement wasn't able to pry it away from the extremists, they kind of stayed in control of the discourse, what do you think would have been the future of the gay civil rights movement? And what do you think that might show us about, again, the trans moment that we're in right now?
That's a great question. And I'd have to think about it to give you an answer, because I can imagine several different ways that it would have gone. One is that in the end, it wouldn't have mattered, and the American people would have come out in pretty much the same place, because I think, you may disagree, but I think same-sex marriage was the good and right answer, and that it was good for gay people and straight people and society and marriage. So we might have come out there anyway. On the other hand, we might have seen the agenda go in different directions. We might have seen much more backlash. We might have seen more gay people who were not radical, which were the majority. 25% of gay people voted for George W. Bush in 2000. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, in any case, were not on board with the kind of the radical agenda. And we might have seen, it might have taken years longer to reach where we got today, because society would have been fighting the notion that if you're pro-gay, it means, I don't know, you're anti-capitalist and pro-choice and all of these other things.
Well, that's kind of where I was.
It's a long way of saying I don't really know.
Well, that's kind of where I was headed. Again, in a different conversation, I heard someone communicate something that it really struck me at the time, and they said, "Look, part of the reason why the gay civil rights movement worked so well was because we were asking for fundamentally conservative things. We, like you said, we wanted to be married like other people. We wanted to serve in the military like other people. And if it had been a radical ideology that threw those things out, it would have been far harder for the average American to empathize with the situation of a gay person and to move forward with it."
Yeah, I think that's right. The cultural left in the late 80s and on into the 90s believed, for example, that the whole idea of marriage and family should be undermined and rejected. Mm-hmm. You just have a whole spectrum of relationships. They didn't believe in monogamy, even as a goal, for example.
Well, and I
think that was an agenda which I think would have been rightly rejected by the American public. And unfortunately, the more modest and conservative agendas, just let us fit in, I think might have gone down the tubes with it.
And that was kind of the question I wanted to ask. And I wonder if something similar is possible right now. I mean, for example, you just talked about the norms of family. And, I think about transgender children and what it means for them and their families. And that you have, certain radical elements that want to help kids pull out or pull away from their families. And, I'm sure the average trans person, though, would maybe make a different argument, which is, no, I want them to be embraced and welcomed and a part of their families. And so I do wonder if the point that we're talking about here really, like you said, applies in the trans moment, which is we need to have a kind of more conservative, centrist approach to making common sense accommodations for everyday people. Would you say that's at the heart of what you want to see happen?
I guess I'd put it a bit differently. Some of these issues just are really hard. Like, what do you do about the trans kid who's 14 and undergoing puberty? How do you deal with that medically, socially, emotionally? There's no analogy to that in gay world. There's no analogy really to the sports question. that comes up, issues like Leah Thomas in gay world. Some of these things are just really, really hard, and they're going to be hard. So I think the way I put it, the emphasis would be that there is no alternative to having some pretty tough, pretty honest social and scientific and medical conversations about those things to figure them out. And it's going to take a little while. And what won't work is to squelch those conversations one way or the other, either because right-wing legislatures say, you can't even talk about this. You're a bunch of groomers if you bring it up, a terrible, terrible slur. Or because left-wingers say, you're a bunch of transphobes, you're a bunch of bigots, and you're causing young trans people to kill themselves if you bring it up. There is no alternative but to do some really hard work the next few years, scientifically and socially, to figure out these issues.